Welcome to ETMA Tech Talk, the podcast that unveils forces shaping the future of tech. In each episode, we bring together visionary leaders, forward-thinking innovators, and game-changing experts who are transforming the enterprise tech landscape. Listen to insider perspectives, dive into bold stories of digital transformation and strategic breakthroughs. Here is your host, ETMA's Managing Director, Joe Basilli.
Today, Melissa Reeve, author of Hyperadaptive, Rewiring the Organization to Become an AI-Native Enterprise, joins us to discuss why 80% of AI initiatives fail, according to a RAND Corporation study. This conversation shifts the focus from what AI tools should I buy to how do I wire my company to survive. It is a pre-mortem to identify failure points and learn why enterprises must rewire themselves to compete in today's environment. Decisions must be made faster, learnings must be continuous, and adaptability is a capability that is core to every organization. She will also discuss how leaders across IT, finance, procurement, and security can move from experimentation to execution without adding complexity or risk. If you are a CIO, CTO, CFO, FinOps leader, or a senior executive, or just thinking about AI in your job, this episode delivers practical insights that you can use immediately. Melissa Reeve is a strategist and an advisor and author who works with global enterprises at the intersection of AI, organizational design, executive leadership, and operating models, helping organizations adapt. Her perspective is distinguished by a focus on human systems, how leaders make decisions, how teams learn, and how governance either enables or blocks progress. Some key takeaways: AI integration is an organizational challenge, not just a technical one. Why top-down mandates often fail, and how empowering middle managers as AI champions can accelerate adoption. A roadmap to becoming a fully hyper-adaptive organization. How to avoid costly failures. Learn specific strategies, like the focus framework outlined in her book, that leaders can apply immediately. Things you can do differently to make your organization stronger as you implement AI. We want people to leave this podcast saying we don't need to fire everyone and hire data scientists. We need to rewire how our current teams talk, decide, and learn. If we do that, we don't just get AI, we get a company that can handle whatever comes next. Welcome, Melissa.
AI isn't standing still. If you train your organization today, that training is going to be outdated in 3 or 6 months. You don't want your entire organization trying to keep up with these changes because they're happening all the time. And quite frankly, they're really big. You don't want your entire organization doing this because they all have full-time day jobs. And so what I advocate for is installing a structure where you can have certain people who are keeping their finger on the pulse of what's going on with AI, and they're able to distribute the right information throughout the organization. And we shift learning from a point in time. We're spending 15, 20, 30 minutes a day getting updated on the latest capabilities, the latest information, the latest things that are impacting our work. And I feel like that's the shift that we're going to need for the foreseeable future as these models continue to roll out more and more capabilities.
So that's a major shift in the way I was thinking about AI. I was thinking AI could just teach me as it changed and evolved.
It is and it isn't. For example, I had a nice conversation with Gemini about how I could be using Google AI Studio. And you think about maybe there's 100 updates across models within a week. How do you know what questions to ask AI to teach you about? I happen to know about Google AI Studio, and I happen to know to ask it that question. But if you don't have the finger on the pulse of AI, how do you even know what questions to ask? Wouldn't it be easier to have part of your organization tuned into these updates and maybe gave you the prompt to ask AI so it could teach you?
So what are the implications as it comes to resourcing an AI implementation or a program that a large enterprise is planning to implement?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this before the show, and I was drawing a line between the advent of the PC in the 90s and today. It's so similar. You have this powerful machine or capability in the case of AI that you're putting into everybody's hands. In the 90s, we built up an infrastructure alongside that. So we fired up a help desk. We fired up our IT departments to support people as they started to learn and integrate this technology into their lives. It feels like with AI, the mindset is much more like what you described. We're putting this powerful capability into people's hands, and then we're saying, good luck, go have a conversation with AI and try and learn this. But when you think about the reality of AI, I'm always interested in other people's opinions. But for me, I get to this point where AI is hallucinating, and who do I call? Who do I turn to when AI is going off the rails? Who do I turn to when I'm not sure if I can upload this data set into our AI? Who do I turn to learn about those capabilities? And I feel like that's the part that organizations as a whole haven't really grasped, that we need to build a similar infrastructure alongside of our AI rollout to really support the human.
What's your approach that differentiates you from other folks that are writing books and doing consulting?
And I'm sure there's other people who have similar approaches. What I do is I say that the world's largest enterprises, bigger organizations, if you've got north of a handful of people, you've got what I call a linear organization. You think about strategy to execution and the layers of hierarchy. And then you think about concept to delivery and the handoffs that happen as work gets done. What I believe will happen is AI will start to compress both of those dimensions. The hierarchy will compress as decision-making gets more efficient, and our ability to go from concept to delivery will compress as skills flatten out, and we're able to have fewer handoffs and delays. And the organizations that are getting started today, these AI native organizations, automatically will have a compressed hierarchy and compressed delivery. So the question becomes, if you are an enterprise, how do you get from this linear organization into a more AI native or hyper adaptive organization of the future? Because if you don't, we're looking at the next Blockbusters, the next Nokias, we're going to see giants fall because these AI native organizations can move very quickly. So what the hyperadaptive model does is it says we can help linear organizations move iteratively and incrementally toward that AI native future by spinning up several support structures. It's a point of view that, quite frankly, I haven't heard people articulate. I've spent 2 years researching best practices and success patterns and surfacing them in the context of the book.
From your research, where do you see the breakdowns occurring and why?
There's a couple of key points. One is underfunding of these support structures, right? I've seen it over and over in organizations. We all started off a little confused, myself included. Then we thought, okay, let's buy some tools. I see organizations investing in Copilot licenses or their LLM of choice. They rolled out training. A lot of times it was video libraries or just very light training. It supported that. And then they waited for the productivity to happen, and it just isn't. What's happening is we're getting this bifurcation of 10% power users, people who are leaning in. And then there's kind of like this muddly middle of people who are using it to just do email. And then there's the people who aren't using it at all. And when I think about the 80% failure rate, we have IT organizations that are maybe building custom agents or trying to respond to AI requests within the organization. And what's happening there is the classic IT business divide, right? They don't get the requirements right, or the business isn't ready to absorb it, or by the time they finished it, the requirements have shifted. I see you smiling. You've lived this before. And that's the second piece causing this 80% failure rate.
How should they think about it in terms of governance to support better and smarter decisions?
I think it's one part governance and it's one part prioritization. We can talk more about governance in a second, but I'd like to narrow in on prioritization. In a world of AI, where you have so many use cases that AI can handle, it's sometimes difficult to understand which one you should tackle first. We talked before the show about this idea of a focus framework. And I want to go there. In a world where AI can do so much, you could build agents for just about anything. And you could use AI to support just about anything. What do you really hone in on that will move the business forward? My guess is it's beyond email. I'd like to use something I call the focus framework, and that's just a simple mnemonic. The F stands for fit. Does it fit with your organizational strategy? Like Moderna's got a great one. They said, we're going to try and get 15 new drugs to market in 5 years with AI. That's a great organizational North Star. O is organizational pull. If we build it, will people actually use it? It's not going to sit on a shelf. The C of focus is our capabilities. Do we actually have the capabilities to build this thing? The U is underlying data. Do we have the underlying data that will make this AI agent or whatever it is work properly? And S is success metrics. Can we prove the value to the business? When you start implementing the focus framework, you start to separate your AI use cases into high value ones and low value ones, the ones that will succeed and we can measure it from the ones that we can't. To help with that failure rate, we can really use focus. The governance structures that I'm seeing are reflective of how we've always done things. I see organizations, for example, spinning up AI councils. Like, let's spin up an AI council. And that's fine. I'm not advocating don't spin up an AI council. But let's put that through the lens of the 3 to 6 months that AI is changing. How does your AI council keep up with that level of change? And so I think we need to just shift the lens slightly on governance and start talking about dynamic governance. How do we build governance systems that keep up with this rate of change? The way it's in my mind, and feel free to push back on this, but there's one point of view, is if you now go from watch this video, take this test to prove that you understand the governance rules as the end user, to maybe your governance documents are in a custom GPT and somebody can get real-time feedback. This feels a little sketchy to be opening this zip file, and it had something to do with my DMARC. I'm not a wholly technical person. I was like, oh, this feels like I'm getting in way over my depth. I was able to use the browser extension of Gemini and start asking it questions. Is this safe to open? Why is it or why is it not safe to open? I hope you and your listeners can start to see the shift from governance that sits in a file on an intranet to real-time governance that's being updated continuously and consumed continuously. You just go into the AI tool. So there's some behavioral changes that happen to that. And there's behavioral changes on the people creating governance too, because it's not a committee that meets twice a year. We got it much, much faster than that, right?
That governance committee was continually feeding more data into the AI tool. As you said, every 3 to 6 months, whenever you were using, it's changed radically from what it was. And to compare it to the revolution that's going on in AI, it's just miles faster.
Think about the dialogue that starts to happen too. Now, if you can also see what queries people are querying for your AI governance, all of a sudden the governance committees, and my hope is that we actually have layers of governance that's central, and then AI councils that are operating at functional levels. I have these AI leads, which are your frontline guardians of your governance, and they're answering questions in real time. You're getting information that's two-way because you're able to see what people are querying, and you're like, oh, we hadn't even thought about that use case. We better come up with some policies or guardrails around what people are querying about that we hadn't even thought about.
So it sounds great. When I think about the financial side, the CFOs and FinOps folks, they're continually under pressure to show a fast ROI. How should they be thinking about AI and ROI, especially as it relates to this governance model that you explained, which is going to require more effort and resources.
Yeah. I like to think of it like the J curve, right? We've got a little bit of a dip. We've got some investment to make before we see the payoff. And if you are so hyper focused on the ROI, and I'm not saying ignore ROI, none of us in today's world can ignore ROI. But I think if we understand that there's a J curve as people are learning to use AI, as they're learning to inject AI into their workflows, that it will give us a little bit of patience for that ROI. I think what's throwing people, Joe, is that we see this content being spit out. We see these powerful agents, and we think we should be able to see immediate returns, right? There's a little bit of cognitive dissonance there. But what we don't see is that there's a learning curve, that we have to rewire our processes, that it's going to take a minute to rewire our processes. Just because you can produce 400 blogs doesn't mean that it's going to move the business. And so we need to really shift from output to outcomes. And that's where that focus comes in again, so that we're not having these random acts of AI, which is going to spread our investment really thin, but we start to really focus our efforts on parts of the business and parts of the workflow that will achieve that ROI.
And speaking of outcomes, I think of the CIOs and CTOs, and they're trying to balance innovation with operational stability. So what's their role in this process?
Yeah, it's a business choice, and every business has to figure out how much to invest in innovation and how much to invest in running the business. And there's things like innovation accounting where you can dedicate parts of your budget just for innovation. Innovation accounting metrics start to look like how fast is the organization learning? How fast are we able to bring a new idea to market? And that gets us away from that ROI conversation a little bit. We're starting to measure the business on different metrics than ROI. And yet we value innovation metrics. It does require a mind shift, and the business, meaning the leadership team and the culture, has to support that way of thinking. Not every business is wired that way. Every business has its own culture.
And then can you provide maybe just a few examples for listeners of some cases that you've seen out in the field where enterprises have done something really right with AI, and maybe some cases where they made mistakes? So we don't need specific names of the organizations, but
Yeah,
if you could just provide some cases, that'd be helpful for people to understand the use case and
sure.
do's and don'ts.
Yeah. So I profile companies in the book, and it's all publicly available information. So I'm not going to share anything that's not out there already. As a success company, I do like to point to Moderna. And I think that their 15 drugs in 5 years, what a wonderful North Star in an industry where it typically takes 10 years to bring one drug to market. And they not only had that beautiful North Star, but then they were able to mobilize the organization behind it. And they were able to do it using an approach similar to what I outlined in the book. And the reason is because I researched best practices and I baked those into the model. So the magic of the model is not only identifying your AI leads or your AI champions. Many organizations are doing that. What they're not doing is systematically supporting those leads. With Moderna, they had a prompting contest and they identified their 100 strongest prompters. And they labeled those their AI leads. They also fired up an online community. So now we're talking about communities of practice. And that community had over 2,000 active users a week. We're starting to ignite what Peter Senge calls the learning organization. And we're doing it very deliberately with deliberate action. So we put in, this also starts to bring in John Cotter and change management. We start to identify our leads. We start to get our early wins. We start to spread that socially in creating space and time for people to experiment. We're doing that all behind strong communication and advocacy with leadership. Compare that with a Shopify that says, use AI or else, and we plan on laying off half the staff. Like, who's going to want to lean into that? Just from a cultural perspective, it's not going to happen. Now, research has shown, people always ask, is it top down? Is it bottom up? Harvard has this study that says it's actually middle out. That if you start to activate the middle level of your organization, what those individuals do is they start to tie together strategy and execution, and they're the translation layer. So if we go back to Moderna's example, they're able to connect the 15 drugs in 5 years with the operational reality on the ground. And that operational reality might be, we don't have any capacity to actually use AI or learn AI. And so the middle management layer has enough positional authority to help create that capacity or work with senior management to prioritize our initiatives a little bit differently so that we can have the capacity to integrate AI at the ground level. So you can see how these decisions around the organizational rollout of AI start to impact the success rate.
You mentioned learning loops as a competitive advantage.
Sure. And this goes back to the opening of our conversation where things are changing every 3 to 6 months. So I have what I call the AI learning flywheel. The quadrants of the flywheel are spark, spread, scale, and sustain. In the beginning, the goal is to spark interest. Okay, this thing is cool, I've heard. What does that mean for me? Joe, did you have an aha moment where you're like, oh my gosh, this AI is amazing?
Oh, yeah.
What was your AI or aha moment?
I think it really came down to how I could use it for so many different facets of what I do with ETMA, both in terms of not just email, but also strategy. The strategy aspect of it is really compelling.
You had this amazing thought partner. So we have something we call the Applied AI Workshop, and it's to get that spark going. We work on your workflows. It's amazing to see people spark. And then we spread it through the AI leads. And the AI leads start to teach these Applied AI workshops. And now we can scale because we have many people in the organization who are qualified to create the spark in a hyper-localized manner. It's your team, your people, your context. Those people are supported by what I call the AI activation hubs. Depending on the size of the organization, this is fractal. So you're a small organization, you might have one AI activation hub. If you're a huge organization, you'll have a network of these hubs, and they are in charge of supporting the AI leads. They're the ones who are your monitors around AI changes. And they're the ones who are sensing the models have changed. I know what it means for the organization. I know what it means for this part of the organization. And they start to atomize the learning and distribute it through the leads to the practitioners. And in this way, you're starting to sustain this flywheel because you've got a system where people are continually monitoring what's going with AI, and they've got a way to distribute it out to the organization, keeping the entire organization up to date with the latest capabilities.
That's very positive news in what you just described. I was envisioning that AI was going to allow smaller organizations to overthrow all the large enterprises. From what you just described, having lots of AI hubs in a large organization, in theory, they could overtake a small organization with more innovation.
I think it's both and, right? All of our skills are elevated. I don't do video that well, but I can do it better with Descript and these other tools. I think the other part of this, Joe, is people ask, what's going to happen with the jobs? I certainly don't have a crystal ball. We do have some precedent. Things have been automated in the past. We've had factory automation, DevOps. I think you have some technical listeners. So DevOps, when you strip it away, it was the automation of the software delivery pipe. So what did we see when that got automated? We saw jobs shifting from doing the tasks to building, monitoring, and maintaining the things that do the tasks. That's where the jobs go. Do I think jobs will go away? Yes, especially because AI isn't standing still. Somebody needs to be maintaining these automations as the models change. Somebody needs to be monitoring them to make sure that they're not drifting. I feel like there's a whole slew of jobs that are waiting to be created around that.
Gotcha. And you consulted with a lot of different enterprises, and you've seen some outdated corporate practices. Are there any in particular that you would say need to be deleted to become hyper adaptive?
This one might surprise you. It is the annual budgeting cycle. It needs to go away. Like, money drives culture. And when you think about all of the behaviors that are driven by the annual budgeting cycle, the territorialism, the need it to use it or lose it by the end of the year, the desire to control and have more budget and power. I talk about this in the book, like gradually shifting that. Maybe we can get it to be more dynamic, more responsive. I talk about a new funding model where you're funding innovation circles, you're funding value streams, you're funding the stable core of the business. And those have different metrics and responsibilities because it's a different business at that point.
As we start to wrap up this part of the discussion, what are some of the most important lessons and takeaways that you want the audience to jot down and implement?
I think it's really about how your AI rollout needs to be supported. One of the first questions I get is, Melissa, are we talking about new headcount? People are very concerned about that. And the answer is no. But you do need to start building capacity. Let's talk about your AI leads. If you could get 20% capacity for an AI lead in the beginning, and maybe you have in a giant organization 100 or 500 AI leads, and maybe a handful of those will become full-time trainers of these applied AI workshops. Everybody else is supporting that learning flywheel. Measure the impact. Start to just learn your way to understanding what kind of support your organization needs to start moving the needle and really demonstrating ROI with your AI implementations.
And if we were to distill and put it on a billboard in Times Square, what would you want people to know about AI that maybe they haven't thought of?
I think if I had a billboard in Times Square, I would say, with great power comes great responsibility. AI is the light and the dark. The same AI that can trash the climate can potentially solve climate change. The same AI that is creating great wealth can create great wealth disparity. I would encourage everybody who's listening to think about the additional power that we're getting and how we can harness that power more for the good than for the dark side of AI.
What do you think are some of the most underrated skills so that they have more of a hyper adaptive organization?
Yeah, I do feel like I'm going to name two. One is curiosity, because when you think about those power users, they're the curious. They're the ones who want to lean in and learn and figure it out. And they're going to have to keep doing that over and over again. And then the second one is critical thinking. Have AI write the essay from the point of view of Abraham Lincoln, then from the point of view of Einstein, and then from the point of view of an astronaut, and then debate truth. Like, what are the pros and cons? And that's the layer that AI needs, whether you're talking about code or content or strategy. That's the human part that has to be injected into whatever AI kicks out.
Love it.
Curiosity and critical thinking.
Yeah, that's really great. If you could go back in time, what would you tell your younger self in terms of advice?
I would say you got this. No problem. I spend so much time worrying and planning and
And if your younger self were to listen to this podcast today, what do you think would surprise them or shock them the most?
I studied Japanese for many years and I lived there twice. That younger person would probably be like, what the heck happened? Why are you still living in Japan? And why aren't you speaking Japanese? And what did I do all that for?
What's a tool, app, or hack that you use daily?
Yeah, I've fallen in love with now there's Claude for Chrome. There's the Gemini thing in the corner of your browser. I'm sure ChatGPT Atlas is their version of it. I have come to rely on those. Like if I get stuck on a piece of software, I just ask that little button in the corner, how do I do this in this piece of software? It looks up the help thing and then distills my next step. Or if I'm writing an email, I just speak into my microphone what I want to say, and then it composes the email. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about it.
I'll have to try both of them. What are you passionate about? Hobbies and things outside of work?
Oh, outside of work.
Yeah.
I have a very rambunctious 2-year-old dog named Otis, and I think the next step with him is to try and teach him flyball.
Where can people get your book? Where can they find out more about your research and potentially contact you?
Appreciate that, Joe. Hyperadaptive.solutions is the URL. The book, Hyperadaptive, Rewiring the Enterprise to Become AI Native, is available on Amazon or your favorite bookseller. It will be released in May of 2026, but if you're listening to this before then, just know that there's some really cool pre-order goodies that you get if you do pre-order. And as you can tell, I enjoy chatting about AI and I welcome the conversation. Feel free to look me up on LinkedIn, Melissa M. Reeve. So it was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
ETMA Tech Talk podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes research, collective wisdom, and action. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions from the market's top problem solvers, making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.